there is a problem with the public discourse that pointing to the places where we need to do better seems to be almost characterized as an anti-national. I love the infrastructure development this government is doing, perhaps not in Uttarakhand, but many other places. But let's agree on that. So there are lots of places we can agree. We can also agree we're both nationalist. It's harder to be a critic and easier to be somebody who's clapping all the time. What is the reward to being a critic in this environment? And what we make clear in the book is there are many reasons why we couldn't follow the China model, and those are still with us, including the fact we are democratic. Both the delimitation and the continual sort of reallocation by the finance commissions, which seen too much as the strong hand of the center doing what it wants. Those kids protesting the lack of jobs are as worthy of protection as that scientist who's protesting the existing paradigm and creating something which will revolutionize thinking.
Hello and welcome to the News Minute. Today we are in conversation with Dr. Raghuram Rajan, whose latest book has just hit the stands. It's called Breaking the Mould, Reimagining India's Economic Future. Thank you, Mr. Rajan, for joining the News Minute. In an interview, I heard you saying that it's ideas that matter, identities do not. But when someone like you writes a book, and that also the book is called Reimagining India's Economic Future, do you not think that people are going to also look at the identity and not just the idea?
I think that's, in the kind of society we live in nowadays, that's almost inevitable. But I would urge people to actually read the book, engage with the ideas, and they may not agree with all of them, but I hope they agree with some of them. It's a very easy to read book aimed at non-economists.
In the book, there is a very interesting chapter where there are readers asking questions, imaginary readers asking you questions and your co-author. One of the questions is that, why are you so negative about everything? Why did you feel that you have to include that portion in the book?
Well, I think one of the problems we decry in dialogue is really the incapacity to have a dialogue. We look at each other and ascribe motives, identities. You are for this party or this caste or this segment, and he is for that, and you can't actually have a dialogue about ideas together. And we wanted to preempt that by actually having somebody who might think differently from us, posing us the questions, okay, in a way which is different from the trolls, actually trying to engage and saying, why do you say this? Instead of you're saying this because you're that. And we try to give an answer. And you may not agree with the answer, but it's an attempt to answer a genuine question, accepting that we both want the best for the country, but let's engage on the issues and make sure that we try and convince you.
So the book is called Reimagining India's Economic Future, and one of the main focuses in the book is that we can't simply be looking at the manufacturing sector, but we have to have some way forward where we look at services sector. Could you just explain in brief what the book looks like?
Very quickly, I mean, the book starts with an economic premise, and then it lays out, if this is the different future we want to go to, how can we obtain it? What all changes do we need to make? And it's moving away from the traditional, you need to do this, you need to do that, to here are the big picture things, both political and economic, that you need to do. So what is the basic economic premise? It is saying that, look, as far as the old style of growth goes, which China followed, with Korea followed, etc., manufacturing exports-led growth, there are a couple of problems which are emerging with that. One is huge levels of protectionism emerging across the world. Everybody wants their own manufacturing sector, and they don't want to be a big importer. And you've already seen the US-China tariff issue, but post-pandemic, you're seeing a huge increase in protectionism. So one is the panorama is not as open anymore for that kind of growth. The second problem...
So you're saying we can't follow the China model?
It is hard to follow the China model, even if we had all the strengths that China has to follow that model. And what we make clear in the book is there are many reasons why we couldn't follow the China model, and those are still with us, including the fact we are democratic. But the second, I think, big problem, I think, in following the China route is China is still there. China is a huge country. The reason countries managed to follow this route and move up is because they were initially competing with the West. And the Chinese worker was, 1/5, 1/10 the pay of a Western worker, and they had a lot of competitive advantage when they were fighting the Western worker. Today, we have the Chinese worker is still there because China still has people that it's employing from agriculture in the Western provinces. But there's also the Vietnamese worker, the Bangladeshi worker. This is the lowest end of the value chain where the least value is being created because it's so competitive. What you want to do is occupy the higher parts of the value chain where, in the earlier in a global supply chain, think of the iPhone. Earlier on, it's the design, the intellectual property, the patents that go into it, which is what Apple does. Later on, it's iTunes, the apps, the marketing, the finance, which also Apple does with its fantastic stores, for example. That's the high part of the value chain. What comes in between is the manufacturing. Apple hasn't done any manufacturing since 2004. It's all done by Foxconn. What is Apple's value? $3 trillion. What is Foxconn's value? It's worth $50 billion. Apple is worth 60 times. What we're saying is, what manufacturing now entails is typically the lowest end. Now, there is more sophisticated manufacturing, I'll come to that in a second, but capturing the higher end often means doing the high value-added services. And India is already pretty good at that. 20% of chip design is done in India, much of it from Bangalore. So we need to start thinking of how do we move forward if the manufacturing route is much harder, if manufacturing has now become very competitive, but there's a whole area which is white space, which is services, including direct services. Today, a consultant from Bangalore can provide services in Chicago. And that's because during the pandemic, something else happened. Technology enabled us to service at a distance, and it became appropriate to do it. No longer does a client want you to show up at the office. You can provide a presentation at a distance. So a lot of change has happened. We need to start thinking about where the future lies. And the future, in the past, what you used to do is agriculture, move into manufacturing, low-skill manufacturing, move up the manufacturing ladder, eventually move into services. We can leapfrog the entire sort of manufacturing. I'm not saying we should.
But how do we do that leapfrog?
What does it take to make an individual, somebody in a third world country who can do only third world jobs, to somebody who's effectively in a first world country who can do first world jobs? You do it every day in Bangalore. You give them a good education. As soon as they become a highly educated person, somebody who graduates from IIM Bangalore, they become capable of taking those jobs in first world countries. They become a hot, sought-after commodity. You can transform individuals within a generation through education. That's because you're focusing on human capital, not on physical capital or infrastructure, on brain rather than brawn. If we can focus on engaging our people, giving them a much better education, not the 20,000 people who go through the IIMs, but make that 200,000, make that 250,000. 1.5 million engineers we train every year. Only about 100,000 are really going through top-class institutions. Can we make all 1.5 million unemployable? So we talk about this alarming statistics. 50% of our graduates are unemployable. You've taken them all the way there, but you're not getting them to the final place that is a job. So the single most important problem today, and that's where we start, is jobs. We're not providing enough jobs for our people. So you can do two things. You can create jobs for the people we have. That's what the government is trying to do. And it's a good thing. We should do as much of it as we can. And there are many places we point out that you can create new jobs, which will aid our path to growth. But more important is make people capable of doing the jobs that businesses want to create. In other words, demand and supply, increase the supply of very qualified people.
I want to read out one part of the book where you have said, India has become a mass assembler of mobile phones, the least value-added part of the supply chain. accounting for only a few percentage points the total value of the mobile phone. So you're basically critiquing that most of the times we are doing the low end of the job. But why can't, my counter question would be, why can't we start with assembly? We can't be overnight doing the high end jobs, right? So governments, both the union government and state governments, are going to question, we have to start somewhere. What is wrong with that?
No. So I would question two parts of it. When you say start, it implies the climb requires starting here. The climb no longer requires starting here. And that's because we're already there. We're already doing the high value added parts. The climb requires expanding the number of people who can do that rather than saying we have to do some magic to get up there. You don't have to start here. I gave the example of Apple and Foxconn. Apple makes nothing. Foxconn makes everything. But Apple occupies the heights. It didn't have to start in the depths, right? So it is no longer true you have to start in the depths. That said, we are absolutely not against creating low-skill manufacturing jobs. If we can create it, well and good. The wrong thing to do is to assume that A, the only way you can get it is to subsidize it, which we are doing plenty of. It's not even clear we're getting more value added than the subsidies we are providing. And second, that it's a belief that we'll move upscale because we're subsidizing and bringing this here. Counter example, Nokia had a plant in Chennai, was continuously assembling, never went upscale. Another counter example, this is a more successful industry, the car industry. We've had a car industry flourishing by all counts for the last now 30 years, right? Since the early 90s when we liberalized. Is there one Indian car which is sold across the world? One Indian car? No, zip. So we haven't progressed in this way. We need to focus on doing that.
So you are saying that progress can be done only if we leapfrog?
That progress can be done if we focus on what it takes to do that, which means generating intellectual property, generating creativity, being more of an ideas economy. It means building up our human capital right from the beginning. It means starting with fixing malnutrition. It means improving our schools. It means improving our universities. We don't have one university in the top 100. Now, I'm looking at the downside only to say that let's recognize our weaknesses in order to fix them, because the upside can be huge. We can be the first country that leapfrogs into the high value added. It can be high value added also for manufacturing. Think of Tesla. Tesla, the manufacturing is not that central. What is central to the value of the Tesla is the software. 40 million lines of code going to the Tesla. We already do the coding now. So why not focus on even when you're looking at manufacturing, the services that go into manufacturing is one part we can be. Again, none of this is saying don't do manufacturing. It's saying don't spend a huge amount on it. And I'll give you one last example to make this point. We are getting Micron to bring a factory into Gujarat. Gujarat government plus the central government is putting $2 billion in direct capital subsidies into it. Micron is bringing another $700 million. So the bulk of the money is a subsidy from the government. For what? 5,000 jobs. 3.2 crores per job to produce memory chips. These aren't even logic chips. The question is, this is 1/3 of our entire higher education budget. All the money going to IIM Bangalore, IIT Madras, IIT Mumbai, that's 44,000 crores a year from the central government.
So you're saying the cost-benefit ratio does not work?
It doesn't look at all comparable.
But isn't this a problem across states? For example, even if you look at development projects, like during the Telangana elections recently, there was a lot of talk about the Kaleshwaram lift irrigation project, that the cost-benefit ratio, which is 80,000 crores being spent for the project, the benefit is not going to be as much, that the amount of land which is going to be irrigated is very less compared to that. So do you think governments, whether it's state or union, sometimes they look at the narrative,
Right.
but they don't look at the cost-benefit ratio?
Absolutely. I mean, why Micron? It's a shiny project. It looks like we've arrived on the manufacturing side. When you look at the details, what are we contributing to that? Maybe some workers, but the intellectual property is coming from Micron. They will own all that. And we are spending $2,000 to bring them here. Why? Why not instead incentivize an Indian version of Micron? But it doesn't have to be manufacturing. That's the costliest part of the chip chain. Cost-benefit analysis. don't focus on manufacturing. NVIDIA is a firm which is entirely based on design. It owns the patents on the chip design. It is worth $1 trillion. TSMC, which makes the foundry, that's the most expensive part in terms of capital. That is worth about $400 billion. So it's not even where the value is added is when you look at chip manufacture versus chip design. We are doing 20% of chip design. Expand that, but own the product. Why can't we create our own NVIDIAs? It will take time. It will take intellectual property, but we need to create more products like this. That is what your organization, iSpirit, emphasizes. I think it's a very important focus. And this cost-benefit analysis we have to do again and again. And what we're saying is, let's elevate the consciousness. If we want to be a developed country, we cannot follow a model where we just provide subsidies to industry. You need to focus on the basic homework to improve the quality of our people.
Okay, now I want to just shift a bit to economics and politics together. You speak about the old Chinese model of decentralization, where local governments would compete with each other and they would somehow try to bring the industries there through a lot of policies. Now, I see that a lot in the south here. For example, one day the Karnataka minister will say, this industry is coming to us. Tamil Nadu will challenge the next day. Telangana will. So that kind of competitiveness, do you think that is helpful?
I think it's helpful so long as it focuses not on giving more and more tax subsidies, but focuses on, I am going to improve the environment for you. You come, I will make sure we have land acquired for you, or we will eliminate the bureaucratic hurdles you have to pass through. That was what the Chinese did. They really cleared the way for these companies. China is not an easy place to do business. But these local governments did work with the companies, made them their local champions, and paved the way for them to set up very quickly, right? The story that all our business people say, I went to the city, the mayor was standing there with all his vice mayors, and they had all the papers ready for us. They said, just sign here, it'll all be done. And that's the kind of can-do environment we want. But I don't think what we want to do is compete on each one giving more and more subsidies to these industries. That will be the ruin of our fiscal. It will be the corporate freebie equivalent of the populist freebie that we now see. You don't want that. So we need some sort of sensible discussion among states on that. But if you're competing on policies, on clearing the way, that's good. It gets rid of some of our red tape and makes setting up much easier.
You also speak a lot about the Punjab model, about how at one point of time there were a lot of subsidies given, especially for power, for agriculture. Then the sort of impact it had on the economy itself. You go into detail on that. So what intrigued me is that even the elections which are being held now, one of the biggest promises is subsidized electricity or free electricity for farmers. So do you think that Punjab model has not served as a warning for most states even now?
I don't think people are realizing that a freebie once given is virtually impossible to take away, right? Whether it be something in kind, which is free electricity or free grain. I mean, you've seen already that the grain we gave during the pandemic now has been extended to a large number of people for a long, long time. And that means that it is going to constrain government budgets for a long time. And there are only so many people you can tax before they start running, especially at the state level, right? So to some extent, every kind of a freebie announcement, you have to make sure it's as well targeted as possible. So the outlay is relatively small. We're not against giving the poor more money. It gives them more ability to send their kids to better schools, which we obviously want in this book, and feed their kids better, which is important to get rid of malnutrition. But giving everybody more money when they don't need it, giving every woman, regardless of their income, free passage on the trains and buses, we need to be a little more careful. Now, it may be some of these, no rich woman travels on buses. If you think that way, maybe some of this is reasonably targeted. But you have to keep seeing that you're targeting properly because you don't have enough money. One example of a poorly targeted scheme is the old pension scheme. Going back to the
you have always been against the old pension scheme?
Yeah, I think it was a very sensible move, maybe in the early 2000s, because somebody did the calculation and saw it would be ruinous if government officials kept getting the old pension because it was way above what they contributed, and eventually we would not be able to afford it. I think that is very much the case even today. Early, it looks like a win because you can get some money back from the scheme. Later on, it becomes more and more of a burden on the state, and government officials are not the worst off.
I have at least 3 follow-up questions from this one answer of yours. First, you use the word freebies. Now, for example, in South India, the party, the Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam or DMK, has been saying, and a lot of others have been saying, that the word freebie, the usage of the word itself is problematic, that it should be called as welfare measures, because the term insinuates that you're just giving off something for free, that it is not welfare.
I think it becomes more welfare. So this is where it becomes more welfare when it's really well targeted, and the beneficiaries can use it, can exercise choice to improve their investment, whether in their children, whether in themselves, right? So, for example, give a poor household more money. It improves the quality of the diet. We don't eat cereals only, maybe some eggs, maybe some vegetables, dal. That would improve the nutrition in the children.
So that you would say is a welfare measure.
I would say, and if they can send their kids to better schools, they learn more.
What is a freebie then?
What a freebie is basically a poorly targeted, untargeted, purely populist measure. So I would say the OPS is a freebie.
So I go to my next question. There was an interesting interview of former Finance Minister of Tamil Nadu, P. Thiagarajan. He was in fact asked that Tamil Nadu is always criticized for these welfare measures, or freebies as most people call it, Revadi as the Prime Minister says. So someone asked him, why not targeted? Why should it be for everyone? So his answer was that a few non-deserving individuals may end up getting this, but that should not be the concern of the government. The concern of the government should be that no one who's deserving should be left out.
Yeah, I mean, it's type 1 versus type 2 errors. One can differ on that. But you look at the latest scheme of the Tamil Nadu government, there is a process of targeting in that, if you're an income taxpayer, you will not get it. If you have thus and such ownership of vehicles, you will not get it. There's a whole range of people who are excluded. So, in an attempt to reach everybody who is deserving, it is at the first a universal scheme. And then there are exclusion criteria. You will not get it if this, you will not get it if that. And the hope is you can bring those exclusion criteria to play to such a degree that only the truly deserving are included. But typically you will not get there. There will be some undeserving, but you will have satisfied the purpose of reaching every one of the deserving. So, I mean, that's the way they would characterize that method of targeting.
You spoke about the free bus passes. What is your take on that? Because we saw that coming in Karnataka. Now in Telangana, the Congress is one of the same premise.
So I think one of the big issues for women is safe travel to their place of work. We have a very low female labor force participation, which we talk about in the book. So to the extent you can improve the safety of travel, for example, for very poor women, rather than them walking, you allow them bus travel, etc., through this method. That's good. And it can even improve, it can pay for itself some of the way if they can capture good jobs that they retain outside the home. So I think, again, what matters is targeting. Now, you may argue that universally I allow all women to come. It doesn't matter because the number of upper middle class women who come in are basically very small. This is what we call self-targeting. Manrega is something like that. Anybody can get that, but me and you are not going to work in the field for a day for that 100 rupees or whatever it is now, right? So that is a self-targeting process. It may be that allowing all women onto the bus free is self-targeting. All you have to do is identify whether they're a woman or not. But it could be that perhaps more targeting is useful over time. You have to work on the cost-benefit analysis. Do we have to issue some kind of a card to all the women who are offered this service? Maybe that would improve targeting. That's a matter of cost-benefit, which we started out with earlier.
And a lot of states now have this scheme, which is to give women money every month, right? Whether it's Grihalakshmi here in Karnataka, Mahalakshmi in Telangana, Tamil Nadu has a scheme, Ladli Behna in Madhya Pradesh. You have been skeptical about direct cash transfers.
No, I have not been skeptical. I've been skeptical about poorly targeted transfers. So I think to the extent that this is aimed at really poor women, it does a bunch of things. When you give them cash transfers, increases their position in the household, allows them, I mean, they invest in their children, allows them to, as we said, better diets, better schooling, and so on. And typically, when you look at how this is spent, general thing is the man will take the money and spend it on drink. It doesn't happen that way. That's not how it happens. But I think you have to be, again, careful about targeting. How much can you afford as a state, and how much should you do of this? You don't want it to get to the point where it is unaffordable. It prevents your investing in schools, in healthcare, in roads, and so on, which is the natural purview of the state. Also, you want to make sure it doesn't create disincentives to work. If it gets so much that they say, okay, hang the work, I'm going to stay at home and collect this. I don't think it's at that level in any state yet, but that's something to keep in mind going forward.
It's only a partly amount, which is 1,000 2,000
rupees.
So
it eases and maybe improves investment. That's a good thing.
So I want to quickly move to education. There's one part where you have said, history has gifted us an advantage that neither China nor Vietnam has, the ability to speak the global tongue. We have adopted the language of former colonial power, English. So there are many states like Andhra Pradesh, for example, which have said that English will be taught to all students. Can you underscore the importance of this and why you believe that is important?
You look at the poor and their choices. They typically are moving to English medium schools because they understand that their kids will do far better if they are taught in English. That is the language of upward mobility in this country, but because it's tied to the globe, it is also because what happens globally. It's also, fortunately or unfortunately, the language in which we communicate between states. One of the interesting examples in the book is about this gentleman who's trying to roll out high-quality schools. And he does it by scripting every lesson. 35,000 lessons, every minute is detailed on what the teacher should do, including you present this video now, you offer this presentation next, this, that. And they started producing really high-quality schools as a result. That's something we desperately need. Not every sort of city can have a high-quality school. Bishop Cotton's in Bangalore, or I remember that from the old days. But you can't have that in every city. You can't multiply that. And what he's trying to do is multiply. What he says is, every time when I want to find place to start these schools, I look for the vernacular schools. And I find they don't have any enrollment. And I can easily lease the facilities from them because parents are walking with their feet and taking their kids out of these schools. That is not to say we should not have teaching in the vernacular. That is not to say we should not be comfortable with our mother tongue. The three-language formula is a great one for this country. But it does mean let's not give up the fact that being comfortable in English is an advantage.
You also speak a lot about health and stunting of children, malnutrition. Recently, there was an index which came out, I think, Global Hunger, and there was so much of pushback from the government saying these numbers are not correct. India is doing quite well. I mean, you're just trying to portray India in a certain way. So, is the political narrative of this shining India so strong that we are just not looking at the real numbers of malnutrition?
I think there is a problem with the public discourse that pointing to the places where we need to do better seems to be almost characterized as an anti-national, when in fact that is the most nationalist thing you can do, saying if we don't do this, it's going to hold us back in the future. Saying India is shining and there's no problem is great for a sense of well-being, but is terrible for preparing us for the future. So the same organizations that put out these, statistics that show India in a poor light, when they put out statistics that show India in a good light, we embrace them. And we say, oh, you're fantastic statistics collection. This is great. India's doing wonderfully well. And then when they show us in a poor light, no, it's a conspiracy against India. You're trying to undermine India. This is nonsense. The rest of the world can see this. They understand that this is not serving India. It's important Indians also understand that.
But you must be getting called anti-national quite a bit. In fact,
Look,
your GDP comment was doing the rounds a lot.
There's a trolling crowd which is organized. And the whole point is to discredit anybody who has a balanced perspective. Remember, they will say it's imbalanced because the only narrative which is allowed is praise at 100%. Anything which is short of 100% is, imbalanced. And so I think what they fear is voices from the other side. And the best way to kill them is to discredit them. What we really need is a debate. What we're trying to do with this book, and that's why that chapter 13 is, let's try and engage with you. I think you're as national as I am. You have a different path. I am suggesting a different path. Let's debate it. And let's see where we can agree and where we can't agree. Perhaps we can agree on education. We think the National Education Policy, which came out in 2020, is a very good document. It has some flaws, but much of it is what we need to do. Let's implement it in mission mode. I'm very much for that. I love the infrastructure development this government is doing, perhaps not in Uttarakhand, but many other places. But let's agree on that. So there are lots of places we can agree. We can also agree we're both nationalist. But let us not keep pointing the finger at each other in order to score domestic political gain. I think what has changed is the government has developed a thin skin. The earlier government, the Manmohan Singh government, I used to be the chief economic advisor, I used to be an economic advisor to the Prime Minister before I became chief economic advisor. And I used to be scathing in public about that. As my co-author, Rohit Lamba says, read my Project Syndicate article on what happened to India, which was written in 2012, about that government. Read the pieces that others have written about the panel in which Ishar Aluwalia, T.N. Nainan, me, was scathing about the government of the day. The fourth member of that panel was Dr. Manmohan Singh. He listened. He said, there's much to reflect on. Let me do something about it. Great Democrats listen. And when they know there is something to do, they change course. The worst thing you can do is say you're doing everything right. You don't hear the criticism, you don't change course, and you wake up way too late. What we're trying to do in this book is saying it's time to think about that. We cannot go blindly forward thinking we've got everything sewn up. I would say it's harder to be a critic and easier to be somebody who's clapping all the time. What is the reward to being a critic in this environment? Right? There is no reward. You're trolled all the time. I think those brave journalists who are calling out the government are really uber nationalists, much more than the kind which is getting benefits from the government or the organizations that are being financed by them, because they're actually working towards a better India despite the cost of doing so, the cost of being pushed out of your job, the cost of not being heard because your platforms have all been taken away. So I think for the broader public, it's important to ask, are these guys sort of saying what they're saying because they have an axe to grind? I mean, why would they have said it in the first place if they wanted an easy life? Just toe the party line.
In fact, this is something which I keep asking my friends' family. I've reported when the UPA was in power. At that time, there were so many scams we were reporting on. Everybody called me nationalistic, that you are actually holding the government to account. But today, things have changed so much that if you hold the government to account, you become an anti-national. So I tell them, I am doing the same job I did 10 years ago. It's your perspective that has changed.
I would not disagree iota with that statement. And that's why I think this nationalist, anti-nationalist is a bogus definition, right? It just means you're a critic. critics are perfectly nationalist. In fact, they think they are being nationalist because they're trying to prevent us going down a dark path, which eventually will end in tears. So, yeah, you may think that there is no dark path, it's all a nice path to nirvana. That's fine. We can disagree, but let's have a debate about it.
So next time somebody says I'm an anti-national, I'll say I'm an uber-national.
Exactly.
Yeah. My final question to you is about this whole narrative, this whole dissatisfaction that many states, especially the ones in southern India, do not get as much as they should because of the tax component that they pay.
So I think that in any country, you become part of the country when you also agree to fiscal transfers. That's what almost defines a country, which means that some of the richer parts will spend money helping some of the poorer parts. That, I think, is given. The question, of course, is those transfers have to be seen as legitimate. They shouldn't be excessive on the parts that are growing better. Even if there are tax on growth, they are seen as one of the benefits. And the entities that are paying should see both some short-term rewards to doing this as well as long-term rewards. So, for example, southern states get a lot of migration. That helps in supporting southern agriculture, southern industry, right? That's a good thing. And that's a benefit they get from the north. The labor, of course, the north gets the benefit that these migrants get salaries and income. So there is a win-win here for the states. The argument in the European Union has been that in the longer run, we supported Spain and Italy to become richer by making transfers to them. When they got richer, they also could express their demand for our products. We were all collectively richer. In other words, we see in the development of the South a need for the development of the North or the West, the East. And as a result, it's a win-win situation of the long run. These are some of the arguments which have to be made. And the third is you have to see that your money is used properly, right? Anybody who's seeing their money taken for some purpose wants to see it being used effectively. So, for example, it should be used in development in those countries. Finance Commission after Finance Commission has been thinking about, can we get an index of development of the beneficiaries to try and encourage that development and give more. I think the issue is becoming more front and center. This has happened, by the way, with every finance commission, so it's not new. It's part of being a country. The problem, to some extent, is if there's a sense that the way these resources are partitioned is not done in an impartial way. And the other big sort of problem that is emerging is with the delimitation, which is that, it seems as if down the line there's going to be an abrupt shift in political power as a result of some states doing much better and therefore slowing population growth and some states not. Remember, this was the original reason for freezing the constituencies. Indira Gandhi's government did not want to reward, high population growth and underdevelopment. And Prime Minister Vajpayee's government repeated that. So now we're going back on that. We say it's okay if you grow, but if that means a huge change in political power, the accumulated change in population over 50 years, it's undone in the span of 1 year. It seems like a large change. Typically, those cause tremendous stresses and conflicts. I think we need to explore how we do this much more slowly, in a much more measured way. And things that are done slowly, sometimes the problem goes away. If we do it over a 20-year span, perhaps by that time, the backward states will come up to the level of the forward states because they engage in catch-up growth. And then we don't have a problem. The political change is smooth, and the economic change is also there.
But Dr. Rajan, there is a sense of injustice, right? Because the southern states are saying that, look, fine, everybody has to contribute to nation building, but it's not like our coffers are full. We would want more money for our own projects. A flood comes, the government has to ask money from the relief fund of the Prime Minister, etc. So there's also that sense of injustice.
No, so I think what you need to do is have a conversation and not say my way or the highway. You have a genuine problem. Let us see how we can deal with it. Can we create more emergency funds for you? Can we create set-asides? Because you have been putting more into the till. When you suffer a deep downturn, we have some benefits. If more of industry, for example, is in certain areas, the business cycle will affect more than, for example, certain states which are more agricultural. Can you increase the size of the transfers to those states in those times because they have a little more, in a sense, a sort of legitimate hold over the funds that they contributed. I think those dialogues can start, should continue. What I worry about is that if we do this in a high-handed fashion, both the delimitation and the continual sort of reallocation by the finance commissions, if it's seen too much as the strong hand of the center doing what it wants.
But that is a genuine worry, right? That
I think
delimitation will be pushed no matter what the
I
opposition
think
will be.
it is a worry, and we've seen in the past that Jhatka actions create a reaction. We don't know what the size of that reaction is. We don't want to find out. I would rather that everything be done by consensus.
My final question to you is that you do speak about democracy and autocracy quite a bit in the book. You said that China could do well at one point of time because of the kind of autocratic government it had. India perhaps did not do well because of democracy, but democracy has its own values, what it gives to its people. And you end the book by saying what India does not need now is an autocrat.
Absolutely. Because if we want to move forward, if we want to become the republic of ideas, if we want creativity, if we want innovation, if we want film directors who are recognized around the world, you need to spark that by having free speech, free discussion, including the right to protest. Those kids protesting the lack of jobs are as worthy of protection as that scientist who's protesting the existing paradigm and creating something which will revolutionize thinking. He needs the sense that his ideas will be protected. It won't be a hierarchy which will cast him out, the same way as Galileo was cast out and others were cast out. Freedom of discussion, freedom of speech, of course, within limitations. You don't want hate speech. But we're sort of, we should not be thinking that we can dispense with all this and still progress. Dispensing with it will take us backwards. We may have the right political system. In fact, we got to strengthen it much more. We got to sort of, as we discuss in the book, limit the ability of government to stifle protest of any kind. But if we can do that, we are generally converging towards a first world economy. And we will generate the kinds of ideas, creativities, capture the high ends of the economic value chain. If we focus on becoming regressive, my way or the highway kinds of governments, we will capture the low end.
Thank you very much for the conversation, Dr. Rajan. So, my way or the highway cannot work. What India needs is more democracy. What India needs is to reimagine its economic process. Thank you everyone for joining us at the News Minute. And remember, independent media survives because of you, subscribers and members. So do subscribe to the News Minute. Thank you.